Now we actually have an opportunity to hear from a few others who are really on the front lines of making this work, a fireside chat with chief diversity officers in corporate and nonprofit organizations. And here to facilitate that conversation is Sara Oliver Carter, the Chief Diversity, Equity, Ethics, and Inclusion Office at Carlow University.
Hello. Good afternoon. I hate to follow my boss, Kathy Humphrey. I always say that, but we want to get started here. I think we're going to carry on the conversation. As he said earlier, my name is Sara Oliver Carter, and I'm the Chief, okay, so it's going to take a minute to get through this, Chief Diversity, Ethics, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Carlow University. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm here with this amazing panel of people. And we're going to carry on the conversation that was started with Dr. Humphrey and panel. We're going to talk a little bit about affirmative action and its impact. And then we're going to go on the same journey that Dr. Pickett talked about. And he talked about the attack on DEI. I don't know, everybody here know about that little attack? All of those bills that were introduced? There's actually one in Pennsylvania right now that is talking about limiting the impact of DEI on college campuses. So it's very real. And it's happening here, and it's happening now. But what I want to do is take a minute and ask this amazing panel, because I am so humbled to be in their presence. They do amazing things, to introduce themselves. And then I have some questions for them that we're going to walk through, because based on the affirmative action decision made by the Supreme Court, what has that done? What is that going to do? And how are corporations feeling about this? So I'm going to start with Mona. And then we're going to move on down, and we're going to dig into this a little bit. And we know we're going to move through this pretty quickly because we got a lot to say, and we want you to hear it. Mona.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mona Dine, and I serve as Chief Diversity Officer and General Manager of Human Resources for U.S. Steel. A little longer than yours.
You know? That's true. Sounds good.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cassandra Cooper. Everybody knows me as Cassie. I serve as the inaugural Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion at FNB, First National Bank.
Good afternoon. I'm Crystal McCormick Ware. I'm the inaugural Chief Diversity Officer here at Duquesne University and the Senior Advisor to the President.
Thank you. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I have a couple of questions here. And I think they're going to drive us into talking a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion and the potential impact and what these organizations are doing to drive it forward, because as we heard earlier, especially from Audra, we need to make progress. We need to keep moving. So my question for the panel is this. With the ongoing rhetoric, and we heard this earlier. We heard this from Clyde Pickett. We heard it from Dr. Humphrey and panel about dismantling DEI. How about that? Dismantling DEI. How are you and your organization staying committed? We talked about committed too. Maintaining a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. And it's tough sometimes because right now we are being questioned. So I'm going to open it up to the group. Crystal, do you want to get us started here?
Sure. I'm proud to say that I work at Duquesne University, a private Catholic institution, so we do have some protection. But I will just give you an account right before the ruling came. The cabinet and we all sat together, and we looked at one another and said, this is going to happen within a day. Right. The fathers on the cabinet said, it's not going to affect us because diversity, equity, and inclusion is our mission. It's who we are. It's why we exist. So as long as we live through our mission, this is what we will do. And they were very definitive about that.
I like that. I like that. So, who wants to go
It's my
next?
alma mater, so woo woo, Duquesne. Good to hear. So in my area or my industry, the actual Supreme Court decision did not directly impact the work that we were doing. I think the one thing that for us at FNB, it really just strengthened the fact that diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that's important to us as an organization, and so we keep it at the forefront of the things that we do. I, in joining the team, created the diversity and inclusion strategy. And I think the one thing we talked about was how important it is for organizations, whether they are corporate or nonprofits, when you're focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, you have to have a strategy.
Yes.
You have to put something in place where, again, you are communicating what that strategy looks like, who your key stakeholders are as a part of that. So that was something that I worked on defining. I worked on it in a collaborative way, so with leadership, executive leadership within the industry or within my company, we kind of worked together on what that looked like, the goals for our stakeholders and the key objectives to achieving those goals. So I think having that firm foundation there really helped us to just kind of drive some of the things and keep that focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion within the organization.
Thank you, Cassie. So I heard, mission, vision, values, driving. I heard
Yes.
strategy. I heard, key deliverables and metrics. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Mona, what are your thoughts?
So, I would ditto what was just said. The court rulings did not have an impact for us within U.S. Steel. DE&I is actually a core pillar of our corporate strategy. So it's embedded to ensuring that we have a best for all strategy. And what we say is, in order to achieve our strategy, best for all, we need the best from all. Right. So it's integrated into our strategic mission of the organization and who we are.
Oh, I like that. I like that. I'm hearing, a lot of really good things here. So I want to kind of talk about, because I think, Cassie, you talked a little bit about this. How can organizations maintain their DEI momentum despite external pressure? I've heard you all pretty much say, like, you're committed, right? But how do you kind of keep it going? Because I think it's important. We do hear, people saying, we're not going to do that anymore. It's not important. And I like the question earlier about the fear factor. So if you could talk a little bit about that, maybe, Cassie, we'll kick it off with you.
Sure. So I think kind of what I said about the collaboration part, that was the C, right, the collaboration. Even in putting together the strategy, I worked with executive leadership. I worked with the leaders of my bank in ensuring that we put together a sound strategy. Additionally, another C, communication. I think that, you can't just communicate the strategy or that we have one, but that's in the back room, right? It has to be at the forefront. So in that first year, I think after the strategy was completed and kind of blessed, as we called it, it was out on the road and in different meetings and sharing that strategy within the bank to ensure that everyone was aware that we had a strategy and that this is what we were going to focus on as we move forward. If we say that we are stronger together, this is how we live it out. And that's what we say. We are stronger together, so we're going to live it out. And I think from the standpoint of the fear, I don't know that I really, there was fear. I don't think there was fear when we talked about it, again, because inclusivity is so important as a part of our culture there at the bank. But the other thing with the inclusivity, you recognize that you have to have diversity in order to ensure that there's inclusivity. So I think communicating that message in a positive way was something that was very important. And then not only myself, but leadership within the organization, buying in and communicating the message as well.
Right. What else? What else? Mona?
I can add to that as well. At U.S. Steel, again, I talked about how we're building this into our DNA. It's how we show up. So you've probably all heard safety first. Actually, U.S. Steel came up with that in 1908, so it's been around for a long time. It's an embedded value of the organization, safety. So what we've done is people understand that. Physical safety first. So what we have done is with that safety component is included the psychological safety piece and really embrace the 360 safety, right? It's D&I, right, resulting in psychological safety. So we've wrapped up and broadened our definition of safety first, right, to include more of the belonging piece of the outcome of D&I effort. So that has really taken on a strong component of our culture. We also, talking about C's, have strong internal champions across the organization. So it's not just Mona as the chief or the people in HR who are doing this, but the employees within the organization from the plant floor all the way to the CEO who serve as these internal ambassadors to ensure that this isn't going away. This is a part of how we work and operate and how we collectively move the business forward, right? So it's best for everyone.
Thank you for that. So we've heard inclusivity, and we've heard like everyone is involved, right? So driving business forward. So Crystal, your thoughts?
So I was thinking about someone who had mentioned from the top down. Well, very early on upon my arrival, we began to work with the board. We worked with the board, then we started to work with the cabinet. So I brought in outside people to train the cabinet. And we spent a full day on diversity, equity, and inclusion in our commitment. And the board went through that as well. The deans and directors and department heads went through the training 3 weeks ago. So it's not just the boots to the ground soldiers at Duquesne University, it's those that are the policymakers. And it was important to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion in them and new employees as well as new board members. So at every new staff and faculty orientation, diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that we talk about, even in the interview process. If you're not on board, you're not on board at Duquesne.
Wow, I appreciate that.
And if I could just real quick,
please.
when you talk about the learning aspect of it, I think it's really important to focus on that, on training around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Don't assume that people get it.
That's right.
Don't assume that people have the same maybe thought about what it is and what it means to actually live it out within the organization. I think in creating baseline training, foundational training within my organization, simply explaining what diversity is, what equity is, what inclusion is something that I felt was important because we need to level set. We need to level set and we need to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, and maybe to add to that too, with the training component, is we do a lot of story sharing and storytelling to
Yes.
make these employees who come and talk about their stories, provide real examples of this is my coworker, this is my person, and this is their experiences, and this is the impact that it's had. So along with the training, the storytelling has been quite beneficial and really helped others too understand what some employees may be going through, giving them a different view of others, and just a better education of something very real that may be happening.
So a day in my shoes, right?
Yeah.
Day in
Just
my
kind of
shoes.
walking. So Crystal, you wanted to say something.
Duquesne University just won 2 awards for their DE&I certification program for their faculty and staff.
Congratulations.
It is completely funded through my division. It was recognized regionally as well as on campus. It's a 30-hour training, and that does not include the capstone. The capstone can be another 30 hours. They go through a 2-year rigorous process.
Wow.
And we make it a point that we get faculty and staff from throughout the university, not in the same divisions, or the units, as we say. We don't say divisions anymore. At Duquesne, we say units. And one of our deans, our dean of pharmacy, was actually the first dean to graduate from the program.
Wow.
Because he was so committed to the program. And his school was probably one of the most racially rigid programs, the School of Pharmacy. And so the dean knew that he needed to take that step and set the tone for the rest of his faculty in order for them to come on board. So we're really proud of that as well.
That is super exciting. I have to say, too, I think Carlow's following that lead or leading in that way. We just introduced to our cabinet, which is the group that reports to Dr. Humphrey. We went through a whole training. It's called the Trusted 10. And most people, when they're thinking about DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion, it's not me. No, I don't have those perspectives. I don't carry that baggage. We went through the Trusted 10. Suddenly, eyes opened up. So what this group is saying is training, even though it's an opportunity to build awareness, it actually does work if done right, right? Yep. So I think there's real opportunity here. So I think we're on the path to, let's talk about obstacles. Like, we're making it sound like it's easy because I know you guys are just that good, right? But what are some of the obstacles that you've encountered as you're pushing some of this out?
I can take a stab at it, go first. So we talked about this earlier as a sort of zero-sum game concept, right? If, you know, if other groups that we're focusing on, it's something that's for D&I is something for this group or for this group. I don't see myself in those groups. What am I losing? Why are they gaining, right? I think that's a difficult thing for any organization employee to go through, and very much an obstacle for our D&I efforts is that thinking versus how is this benefiting us all? How is this enriching our culture? How is this better for business outcomes, right? So really being able to educate and help others understand this isn't about this group here or this group here. This is about collectively how this raises us all. So I think that's a big thing. We talked about the clash of values or the difference in values, you know. So for example, Pride Month, years ago, we have locations across the country, many in rural areas, right? We flew pride flags. Pride flags were ripped down, put them back up. Pride flags were ripped down, put them back up. You know, we had a very strong messaging in that we're not trying to change your beliefs, but you must respect your employees and what, you know, what this stands for. So through education, through tying it back to our values and you know, all of that is something that's helping us move the needle along the way. But again, to show that, as was said, all boats rise is an integral part of the message.
That's great.
I would agree with that. And I think, you know, the other thing is really through collaborative discussions and conversations, I think a lot of the ambiguity can be cleared up. You know, we have that understanding of what diversity is. I talk a lot about the broad lens that we need to look at diversity with, right? We need to have a broad lens. And the one thing I try to make sure that we talk about is everyone, I feel, has that platform, right, based on their own dimension of diversity. I'm a Black woman, I'm a, you know, a single mom, all of those things. So those are my platforms. But as a leader in this space, we have to have a broader lens so that we do see, again, that there are so many other dimensions, and we want, it's about all of us, so we want to ensure that all-inclusive piece of it, not taking away, right? Not taking away from understanding those specific dimensions, but again, really ensuring that we are working for the good of the whole, if that makes sense.
I think it does, and I think that's kind of the theme here.
Right.
It's the good of the whole,
Right.
not only just for the person and the individual, but for the business or the institution. And actually, not only for the institution, but when you think about the institution in terms of university or college, it's the student experience because they are the next level.
Yes, they
right?
are.
Crystal.
You have to establish trust amongst your new colleagues and faculty and staff. Because when you come on board, they're wondering, what are you going to do? How are you really going to move this forward? And I have to admit, when I first came back to Duquesne after a 20-year stint up the street, I realized that conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion were still very uptight.
Yes.
They were afraid. And so you have to empower people to have the courage to talk about it. You have to give them a safe space to talk about it. And you have to be non-judgmental because everyone has their own lens and barometer as to where they came on board with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I've had people say to me, I would have never talked about this in this space because I never felt safe because I always felt attacked if I said I wasn't raised around African Americans.
Right, right. I appreciate that. We have two more questions, and because we're going to move pretty quickly, but I really appreciate what was said here. We talked about all of the things in terms of obstacles, fear being one of those,
Fear.
right? Building trust, right? And then again, making it part of the overall approach. And I like what you said earlier about the broader definition of diversity. I think sometimes we get a little stuck there. Sometimes here in Pittsburgh, it's about race and gender,
right.
and then we go, that's it. But it's much more broad. And I think Dr. Pickett talked about it, and this panel has talked about it. And I think that's one of the things in terms of overcoming obstacles that we need to think about. So my next question for this group is inclusive leadership, right? In terms of how people are leading in their organizations. Because we heard earlier that role modeling makes a difference, right? Can you talk a little bit about that? Mona?
Sure. So I think we're talking about, you know, those behaviors that we want our leaders to model. So for us, It's really around, being curious, being collaborative, having empathy, being open, being honest, being able to have those real conversations. We actually just a few weeks ago went through a whole organizational training on inclusive leadership, and specifically, not this nebulous gray on inclusion, but here are some very easy to do tactics that you could do to include, engage, and advocate for employees within the organization. So it was a very practical sort of step-by-step way that you could be very intentional about creating an inclusive environment.
I like that. Cassie?
Walk the talk.
Ooh.
I think it's so important for leaders to understand that they are being watched as well as heard, right? So I think your words matter, your actions matter as leaders, and I think that's something that's important from the standpoint of competencies, from the standpoint of a leader, right? Say it, if you say it and you mean it, your actions are gonna follow, and you're being watched wherever you are. I think you have to remember that. So that part is important. And then I think as well, we talk about diversity practitioners being agents of change. I think leaders have to be agents of change as well in this space, understanding that their organization, if we don't have the diversity, if we don't have equity, if we don't have inclusion, things stay stagnant, right? We talk about Pittsburgh and why maybe progress isn't happening. Maybe we talk, but we're not taking the action, and we need to be more action-oriented, I think, as leaders, as practitioners, all of it, so.
Crystal?
And so we follow the 6 C's of leadership as well with Deloitte and Touche, but I've added 4.
Say more.
What are the C's? Always remain classy. And as a DE&I professional, you always have to remain calm, cool, and collected.
Ooh.
Because if you don't, you will make decisions based on emotion, and those are some of the biggest mistakes you can make. So I know that when I came on board, along with, I'm sure, when my colleagues came on board, something may have happened, and they expected us to react pretty quickly. We cannot. We have to assess everyone, and we have to be fair across the board before we make a decision. So I've added those 4, so now there are 10 C's of inclusive leadership.
I like
Love
that.
it.
Calm, cool, collected, and classy. I'm going to work on all of those.
And I think emotional intelligence is a big part of that, what you're saying, right? Because we want to respond and not react. Usually if you fly off the handle, it's because you're reacting.
Right.
So learn to respond. I think that's important.
I think that is important. So this is the last question in the last 3 minutes, right? If there's one piece of advice you would like to share with this group that you think will help drive things forward or make a positive impact or just support them, what would you say? Oh.
All right, I'll take it. So to remember that this work is a marathon and not a sprint. You hear that statement all the time, but it's really easy, I think, to get discouraged. It's really easy to feel down when the needle doesn't move maybe as rapidly as you think it should. This, again, is a marathon. Celebrate those small wins because they happen every day. So I think you have to have that your eyes open to be able to see that. And then I think it was Dr. Pickett who just said, realize that, you are a person and self-care is essential. When you feel yourself kind of being beaten down in this race, then sometimes you need to go to your little secret place and replenish, right? You need to replenish however you do that. Meditation, prayer, whatever it is, again, because if not, you get burned out.
Yeah,
and you're not effective.
Definitely. Mona, you're excited.
We were
here.
talking about this before, about how we had the marathon analogy. We're talking about this is a journey, right? This is an evolution. A couple of things too. I think that look at this room full of people who are very passionate about this. Like, expand your network, not only within your organization but outside. Who can you talk to? Who can you learn from? Who can you bring an idea, into the organization? Who could be a spokesperson, maybe another voice, right, into your organization? But leverage the people as support, as benchmarkers, right? All of these things for your own self and for the work as well. I would also say, like, know where you are in your organization and where you're going, and also be realistic. There's so much work to be done. Know what's priority. what can you focus on as opposed to doing it all, right? But what are the true priority items for your organization, and how can you double down on those to really move the needle forward?
Crystal?
My last word is courage.
Yes.
Be courageous and also be direct and truthful to yourself.
Yeah, I think those are great. You know, some of the things I actually think about is communicate, communicate, communicate. Constantly communicate. Clarify, clarify, clarify. Calm, calm, calm. Because I think that all of the time that, you know, that we've kind of talked about what's going on here in terms of DEI, you have to have that calm, measured presence as you clarify and communicate. So with that said, I want to thank these amazing panel. We did it on time, shared a lot of really good information, and they are super appreciated.